The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble courtyard of the royal palace of Valdoria. Guard Captain Marcus Thompson adjusted his uniform one final time before beginning his shift. At 32 years old, Marcus had served the royal family for 8 years, and he took his duty seriously. His dark eyes scanned the palace grounds with practiced precision, looking for anything out of place. Today felt different somehow. The air carried an unusual tension that Marcus couldn't quite identify. The palace staff moved about their duties with nervous energy, whispering in corners and avoiding eye contact with the guards. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual in the ornate gardens. Princess Elena, the king's youngest daughter, was scheduled to attend her morning lessons in the East Wing. At just 12 years old, she was known throughout the palace for her bright smile and curious nature. The staff adored her, often commenting on how she brought light to even the darkest corners of the ancient stone building. Marcus positioned himself at his usual post near the main corridor that led to the princess's tutoring room. From this vantage point, he could monitor all foot traffic while maintaining a clear view of the surrounding area. The hallway was lined with portraits of former kings and queens, their painted eyes seeming to watch over the daily activities of palace life. As the morning progressed, Marcus noticed several unusual occurrences. Lord Chancellor Harrison, typically composed and methodical, hurried past with sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning temperature. 2 kitchen maids rushed by carrying empty trays, their faces pale and anxious. Most concerning of all, the head of palace security had called 3 separate meetings with senior staff, each lasting only minutes before participants scattered in different directions. Around 10 o'clock, Princess Elena appeared at the far end of the corridor, walking slowly toward her lesson. Marcus straightened at his post, offering a respectful nod as she approached. The princess usually acknowledged the guards with a warm smile, and sometimes even a cheerful greeting. Today, however, something was wrong. Elena's usual bright demeanor had vanished. Her face was pale and her steps seemed hesitant and measured. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept well. Most troubling of all, she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. When she reached Marcus's position, she slowed her pace even further. For a brief moment, their eyes met. In that instant, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Fear. Raw, genuine fear reflected in the young princess's gaze. But there was something else too. A desperate intelligence. As if she was trying to communicate something urgent without speaking. The princess continued past him toward her lesson. But just before disappearing around the corner, she did something that would haunt Marcus for days to come. She raised her right hand to adjust her hair, but the movement was deliberate and specific. She touched her ear 3 times, then her shoulder twice before letting her hand fall naturally to her side. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. In his military training before joining the palace guard, he had learned about silent communication methods. The gesture Elena had just performed was not random. It was a distress signal. 3 touches to the ear followed by 2 to the shoulder was an old military code meaning, "Help me" or "Danger." But how could a 12-year-old princess know such a signal? And why would she need to use it within the supposed safety of her own home? Marcus's mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Had someone taught her this signal? Was she in immediate danger? Was the threat coming from within the palace walls themselves? The guard captain remained at his post, but his attention was now laser-focused on his surroundings. Every footstep echoed with new significance. Every face that passed by was scrutinized for signs of deception or malicious intent. The ornate decorations and familiar paintings suddenly felt less like home and more like potential hiding places for unknown threats. 20 minutes later, Princess Elena emerged from her tutoring session. Her tutor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Pemberton, accompanied her partway down the hall before returning to gather her materials. As Elena walked back toward Marcus's position, he watched her carefully, hoping to understand more about her earlier signal. This time, as she approached, Elena's behavior was even more telling. She walked close to the wall, her hand trailing along the stone surface as if for support. When she reached the midpoint of the corridor, she stumbled slightly, catching herself against the wall. The stumble appeared accidental to any casual observer, but Marcus noticed that Elena's hand formed a very specific shape against the stone. A closed fist with the thumb extended downward, another signal. This one meant immediate danger or threat present. Marcus's training kicked in fully now. His hand instinctively moved closer to his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. But he had to be careful. If Elena was truly in danger, making the wrong move could escalate the situation and put her at even greater risk. The princess completed her walk past Marcus without any other obvious signals, but he noticed she kept her head down and moved quickly once she was beyond his position. Her shoulders were tense and she glanced back only once, directly at him, before disappearing around the corner toward the royal family's private quarters. Marcus stood frozen at his post, his mind working overtime to process what he had just witnessed. A member of the royal family was apparently in distress and using military hand signals to communicate her situation. The implications were staggering. Either Princess Elena had somehow learned these signals and was genuinely in danger, or someone had taught them to her specifically because they anticipated she might need them. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky. But for Marcus, the palace had suddenly become a much darker place. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every friendly face could mask dangerous intentions. And somewhere in this maze of marble corridors and ancient secrets, a young girl was silently crying out for help. Marcus knew he faced a critical decision. Protocol demanded that he report any unusual behavior immediately to his superiors. But what if those same superiors were somehow involved in whatever was threatening the princess? The very people sworn to protect her might be the source of her fear. As the morning wore on, Marcus remained vigilant at his post, but his mind was already working on a plan. He needed more information before he could act. He needed to understand the full scope of the situation before risking Elena's safety with premature intervention. Most importantly, he needed to find a way to let the princess know that her desperate signals had been received and understood. The palace around him continued its normal rhythm of daily activities, but Marcus Thompson was no longer just another guard performing routine duties. He had become the silent guardian of a terrible secret, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like the ancient stones of the palace walls themselves. The afternoon brought new challenges for Marcus as he struggled to maintain his professional composure while processing the morning's events. During his lunch break, he retreated to the guards' quarters and carefully reviewed everything he knew about military hand signals. The movements Princess Elena had made were unmistakably correct. 3 touches to the ear followed by 2 to the shoulder, then later the downward thumb gesture. Someone had taught her these signals properly, which meant the threat was real and anticipated. Marcus decided to conduct his own discreet investigation. He began by observing the princess's daily routine more carefully, noting which staff members had regular access to her and who might have taught her the distress signals. The palace employed over 200 people in various capacities, from kitchen staff to senior advisors, any of whom could pose a potential threat. The first person he investigated was Mrs. Pemberton, Elena's tutor. The elderly woman had worked at the palace for 15 years and came with impeccable references. However, Marcus discovered that her late husband had been a military officer who served in special operations. This connection could explain how Elena learned the signals, but it didn't clarify whether Mrs. Pemberton was trying to help or harm the princess. As the days passed, Marcus noticed a pattern emerging. Princess Elena's distress signals appeared, most frequently on days when certain individuals were present in the palace. Lord Chancellor Harrison seemed to correlate with increased anxiety in the young princess. Additionally, Marcus observed that Elena's signals intensified whenever the palace hosted visits from foreign dignitaries or business associates. On the 3rd day of his secret investigation, Marcus witnessed something that made his blood run cold. While positioned near the library, he saw Princess Elena exit the room looking visibly shaken. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she walked. When she noticed Marcus watching, she performed a new signal, touching her temple 5 times in rapid succession. Marcus recognized this immediately as a code meaning, immediate evacuation needed. His heart pounded as he realized the situation was escalating beyond his ability to handle alone. The princess was not just in general danger, she was indicating that she needed to be removed from her current location immediately. The challenge facing Marcus was enormous. He couldn't simply approach the princess directly without potentially alerting whoever was threatening her. Palace protocol required that all interactions between guards and royal family members be formal and observed. Any deviation from this norm would be noticed and reported. That evening, Marcus made a difficult decision. He needed an ally within the palace, someone who could help him understand the situation without compromising Elena's safety. After careful consideration, he approached Sarah Mitchell, the princess's personal maid, who had worked at the palace for 6 years and had always shown genuine care for Elena's well-being. Sarah initially seemed shocked by Marcus's concerns, but when he described the hand signals in detail, her expression changed to one of recognition and fear. She confirmed that Princess Elena had indeed been acting strangely for the past several weeks, often appearing frightened and asking unusual questions about palace security procedures. "She asked me last month if there were secret passages in the palace," Sarah whispered during their discreet conversation in the servants' hallway. "I thought it was just childhood curiosity, but now I'm wondering if someone has been threatening her or making her feel unsafe in her own home." Sarah also revealed disturbing information about recent changes in Elena's behavior. The princess had stopped eating meals in the main dining hall, preferring to take food in her private chambers. She had begun requesting that her bedroom door be locked from the inside at night, something she had never done before. Most concerning of all, Elena had started asking Sarah about which staff members had access to the royal family's private quarters after hours. Together, Marcus and Sarah began to piece together a timeline of events. The strange behavior had started approximately 3 weeks earlier, coinciding with the arrival of a new diplomatic liaison named Viktor Kozlov. This man claimed to represent interest from a neighboring country and had been granted extended access to palace meetings and social functions. Marcus's investigation into Kozlov revealed several red flags. The man's credentials, while officially verified, seemed superficial upon closer examination. His background story contained inconsistencies, and some of the references he provided led to dead ends when Marcus attempted discreet verification through his contacts in palace security. More troubling still, Kozlov had specifically requested access to areas of the palace that were typically off-limits to visitors. He had shown particular interest in the layout of the royal family's private quarters and had asked detailed questions about security protocols during evening hours. Palace staff had been instructed to accommodate his requests as part of diplomatic courtesy. On the 5th day of his investigation, Marcus witnessed the most alarming incident yet. While stationed near the palace gardens, he observed Princess Elena walking with Viktor Kozlov and Lord Chancellor Harrison. From his distance, Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but Elena's body language spoke volumes. She kept her distance from Kozlov, and when he reached toward her shoulder in what appeared to be a friendly gesture, she flinched visibly. When the group separated, Elena walked directly toward Marcus's position. As she passed him, she performed the most complex series of signals he had yet seen. First, she touched her collar 3 times, then made a subtle pointing gesture toward the direction Kozlov had gone, followed by the immediate danger signal she had used before. The message was clear. Kozlov was the source of the threat, and the danger was escalating. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger mixed with professional determination. A foreign operative was apparently targeting a child under his protection, and he would not allow this to continue. That night, Marcus made contact with his former commanding officer, Colonel Reynolds, who now worked in military intelligence. Using secure communication channels, he provided details about Viktor Kozlov and requested any available information about the man's true identity and intentions. The response came back within hours and confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Viktor Kozlov was indeed a foreign operative, but not from the country he claimed to represent. Intelligence reports suggested he was working for a criminal organization that specialized in kidnapping wealthy targets for ransom. The organization had recently expanded its operations to include targeting royal families and high-profile political figures. Even more disturbing, the intelligence report indicated that Kozlov's presence at the palace was not coincidental. His organization had been planning this operation for months, using diplomatic channels to gain access and study their target. Princess Elena was not just in general danger, she was the specific target of a well-orchestrated kidnapping plot. Marcus realized that time was running out. The signals Elena had been giving suggested that Kozlov was moving from the reconnaissance phase to active implementation of his plan. The princess somehow knew or suspected what was happening, possibly because Kozlov had made threats or inappropriate approaches that revealed his true intentions. The guard captain found himself facing an impossible situation. Traditional palace. Security protocols were inadequate for dealing with a threat that had already penetrated the highest levels of access. Kozlov's diplomatic status protected him from routine investigation, and his relationship with Lord Chancellor Harrison suggested that the threat might extend beyond a single operative. As Marcus prepared for what he knew would be the most challenging night of his career, he made one final attempt to communicate with Princess Elena. During the evening meal service, he positioned himself where she would see him and performed a simple military hand signal meaning, "Help is coming." Elena's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Tears filled her eyes as she performed the signal for "understood," followed by "urgent" and "tonight." The 12-year-old girl was telling him that whatever Kozlov had planned was going to happen that very evening. Marcus checked his equipment and prepared for a long night of vigilance. Somewhere in the ancient corridors of the palace, a predator was preparing to strike at an innocent child. But this time, the predator would find that his intended victim had a guardian who understood her silent cries for help and was prepared to answer them with everything he had. The palace clock tower chimed 11 times as Marcus began his covert surveillance of the royal quarters. He had strategically positioned himself in a maintenance corridor that provided visual access to multiple hallways without being detected by standard security patrols. His radio was set to emergency frequency, and he carried additional equipment that his military training had taught him might be necessary in hostage situations. Sarah Mitchell had provided crucial intelligence about the palace's evening routines. The royal family typically retired by 10 o'clock, with Princess Elena's chambers located in the southeast wing of the second floor. The regular guard rotation would leave that area minimally protected between midnight and 2 in the morning, a window that Kozlov had likely identified during his weeks of observation. At 11:30, Marcus detected the first signs of unusual activity. Viktor Kozlov emerged from the guest quarters wearing dark clothing instead of his usual diplomatic attire. The man moved with practiced stealth, clearly familiar with the palace layout despite his relatively recent arrival. Marcus followed at a distance, using the network of service corridors that palace staff used to move about undetected. Kozlov's route confirmed Marcus's worst fears. The man was heading directly toward Princess Elena's chambers, taking a path that avoided the main security checkpoints. He carried a small bag that could contain restraints, sedatives, or other tools needed for an abduction. Most alarmingly, Kozlov moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where the security cameras were positioned and how to avoid them. As they approached the royal quarters, Marcus faced a critical decision. He could call for backup immediately, but doing so might alert Kozlov and cause him to flee before they could gather evidence of his criminal intent. Alternatively, he could continue surveillance to catch Kozlov in the act, but this approach risked Princess Elena's safety if something went wrong. Marcus chose a middle course. He activated a silent alarm that would alert selected security personnel to his location without triggering the general alarm system. This would bring help within minutes while allowing him to maintain surveillance and protect Elena if Kozlov made an immediate move. The foreign operative reached the corridor leading to Elena's chambers and paused to examine the security setup. Marcus watched from his concealed position as Kozlov produced a small electronic device and began working on the door's locking mechanism. The man was clearly experienced in bypassing security systems, confirming that this was not his first operation of this type. Suddenly, Marcus heard a sound that made his heart stop, the soft click of Elena's bedroom door opening from the inside. The princess appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. She looked directly at Kozlov, and Marcus realized with horror that this was not a random encounter. Elena had been expecting him. The conversation between Kozlov and Elena was conducted in whispers, but Marcus could see the tension in both their postures. Elena's body language suggested fear mixed with defiance, while Kozlov appeared to be issuing instructions or threats. After several minutes, Kozlov gestured toward the corridor, clearly indicating that Elena should come with him. This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. Elena was being actively abducted, and he had to act immediately to prevent her from being taken from the palace. However, he also realized that Elena's presence in the doorway suggested she might have been cooperating with Kozlov under duress, possibly to protect other members of her family from harm. Marcus activated his emergency radio and whispered a code that would bring armed response teams to his location within 90 seconds. Then he moved closer to intercept Kozlov before the man could leave with Elena. However, as he positioned himself for intervention, Marcus discovered that the situation was even more complex than he had realized. Lord Chancellor Harrison appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving quickly toward Kozlov and Elena. Marcus initially assumed Harrison was responding to help, but the man's behavior suggested otherwise. Harrison appeared agitated and was making urgent gestures that seemed directed at Kozlov, rather than at rescuing Elena. The three-way conversation that followed revealed the true scope of the conspiracy, threatening Princess Elena. From his concealed position, Marcus could hear enough fragments to understand that Harrison was not trying to stop the abduction. He was participating in it. The Lord Chancellor was apparently coordinating timing and logistics with Kozlov, ensuring that their exit from the palace would go undetected. Elena's behavior during this conversation was remarkably brave for a 12-year-old child. Despite her obvious fear, she stood straight and appeared to be asking questions rather than simply accepting whatever fate they had planned for her. Marcus realized that the princess's intelligence and courage had probably been the only things keeping her safe during the weeks of planning that had preceded this night. The backup security teams were now less than a minute away, but Marcus could see that Kozlov was becoming impatient and preparing to move Elena toward the exit route they had planned. The guard captain made a split-second decision that would determine whether the princess lived or died. He stepped out of concealment and confronted the conspirators directly. "Stop right there," Marcus called out in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Princess Elena, step away from them and come toward me." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Kozlov spun around and reached inside his jacket, clearly going for a weapon. Harrison's face went white with shock and fear. Elena, however, acted with incredible presence of mind. She immediately performed the hand signal for friendly forces and began moving toward Marcus's position. Kozlov drew a pistol and aimed it at Marcus, but hesitated when he realized that gunfire would alert the entire palace and ruin any chance of completing his mission. Harrison began speaking rapidly, apparently trying to convince Kozlov to abort the operation and flee while they still could. "You don't understand," Harrison said desperately. "The girl knows too much. If we don't take her tonight, she'll expose everything. The organization will never forgive failure on this scale." Marcus now understood why Elena had been so frightened and why she had learned military hand signals. Someone, possibly Mrs. Pemberton or another ally within the palace, had recognized the threat developing around the princess and had taught her how to communicate distress silently. Elena had been living in fear for weeks, knowing that people she should have been able to trust were planning to betray her. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor as the backup security teams reached the royal quarters. Kozlov's face contorted with rage as he realized his carefully planned operation was falling apart. He swung his weapon toward Elena, apparently deciding that if he couldn't kidnap her, he would eliminate the witness who could identify him. Marcus launched himself forward without hesitation, crossing the distance between himself and Kozlov in 3 powerful strides. His military training took over as he tackled the armed man, sending them both crashing to the marble floor. The pistol went off during the struggle, but the shot went wild and struck the ceiling instead of any human target. Elena continued to demonstrate remarkable composure during the violent confrontation. Instead of freezing or running randomly, she positioned herself against the wall and used hand signals to direct the incoming security teams toward the fight. Her ability to remain calm and provide tactical information helped the responding guards quickly assess and control the situation. Within minutes, both Kozlov and Harrison were in custody, their conspiracy exposed and their threat to Princess Elena neutralized. As the immediate danger passed, Marcus finally had a chance to speak directly with the brave young girl who had endured weeks of terror while trying to protect herself and communicate her distress through silent signals. "You're safe now, Princess," Marcus said gently as Elena approached him, You did everything exactly right. Your signals helped me understand what was happening and respond in time to protect you. Elena's composure finally cracked as the adrenaline wore off. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that her nightmare was truly over. Mrs. Pemberton taught me the signals, she whispered. She said that if anyone ever tried to hurt me, I should find a way to tell the guards without letting the bad people know I was asking for help. The revelation confirmed Marcus's earlier suspicion about the tutor's role in preparing Elena for this threat. Mrs. Pemberton had apparently recognized signs of danger and had quietly armed the princess with the tools she needed to survive until help could arrive. The elderly woman's late husband's military background had provided the knowledge that ultimately saved Elena's life. As palace security teams secured the area and began processing the crime scene, Marcus felt a profound sense of relief mixed with professional satisfaction. His decision to trust his instincts and investigate Elena's strange behavior had prevented a tragedy that could have destroyed the royal family and shocked the entire nation. The interrogation of Victor Kozlov and Lord Chancellor Harrison revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had threatened Princess Elena. Working with palace security and military intelligence, Marcus learned that the plot extended far beyond a simple kidnapping attempt. The criminal organization behind Kozlov had been planning to use Elena as leverage against the entire royal family, demanding not just ransom money but political concessions that would have compromised the kingdom's security. Harrison's involvement was particularly shocking to the palace staff. The Lord Chancellor had held his position for 12 years and was trusted with the most sensitive government information. His betrayal had been motivated by massive gambling debts that the criminal organization had offered to eliminate in exchange for his cooperation. Harrison had provided detailed intelligence about palace security, royal family schedules, and the best opportunities for approaching Princess Elena without detection. The investigation also revealed how close the conspiracy had come to success. Kozlov's organization had planned to hold Elena in a safe house outside the kingdom's borders while making their demands. They had prepared false documentation that would have allowed them to transport her across international boundaries before palace security could organize an effective search. If Marcus had not recognized Elena's distress signals, she would have disappeared without a trace. Mrs. Pemberton's role in preparing Elena became clearer during the investigation. The elderly tutor had noticed Harrison asking suspicious questions about Elena's daily routines and had become concerned about the increase in foreign visitors with unclear credentials. Using her late husband's military knowledge, she had taught Elena the hand signals as a precautionary measure, never expecting they would actually be needed. "I taught her the signals during our history lessons," Mrs. Pemberton explained to investigators. "I told her they were codes that brave people had used throughout history to communicate when they couldn't speak freely." Elena was fascinated by the idea and learned them quickly. "I never told her directly that I was worried about her safety, but I think she understood that the knowledge might be important someday." The princess herself provided valuable testimony about the weeks leading up to the attempted abduction. Elena revealed that Kozlov had been approaching her during social functions, asking personal questions and making comments that made her uncomfortable. He had begun suggesting private meetings to discuss cultural exchange opportunities that would have given him unsupervised access to her. He kept asking about my favorite places in the palace and whether I ever walked alone in the gardens, Elena told investigators. "Something about the way he looked at me made me feel scared, but I didn't know how to tell anyone without sounding silly. When Mrs. Pemberton taught me the signals, I thought maybe I could use them if I ever felt really frightened." The criminal organization's methods were sophisticated and carefully planned. Intelligence analysis revealed that they had spent months researching the royal family, identifying Elena as the most vulnerable target due to her age and regular palace activities. They had created Kozlov's diplomatic cover story, specifically to gain the access needed for surveillance and planning. Harrison's cooperation had been essential to their success. The Lord Chancellor had provided architectural plans of the palace, schedules of security patrols, and detailed information about which staff members would be on duty during different shifts. He had even arranged for certain security cameras to be temporarily disabled for maintenance on the night of the planned abduction. The investigation uncovered evidence that this was not the organization's first operation. Similar kidnapping plots had been executed successfully against wealthy families in neighboring countries. Elena would have been their highest-profile victim, and her successful capture would have established them as a major threat to royal families throughout the region. Marcus's quick thinking and military training had disrupted more than just a single crime. He had prevented the establishment of a dangerous precedent that could have encouraged other criminal groups to target royal children. The kingdom's intelligence services worked with international partners to dismantle the broader network and prevent future operations. The psychological impact on Princess Elena became a major concern for the royal family. Despite her remarkable courage during the crisis, she was still a 12-year-old child who had endured weeks of fear and the trauma of attempted abduction. The palace arranged for specialized counseling to help her process the experience and return to normal childhood activities. Elena's relationship with palace security also changed significantly. She had developed a deep trust in Marcus specifically, often seeking him out when she felt uncertain or needed reassurance. The guard captain found himself in the unusual position of being both protector and confidant to a member of the royal family, a role that required careful navigation of palace protocol and personal responsibility. "She asks me about the hand signals sometimes," Marcus reported to his superiors. "Not because she's still frightened, but because she's proud of how they helped save her. I think learning that she could communicate and protect herself gave her confidence that she'll carry with her for the rest of her life." The broader palace community struggled to process the revelation that one of their most trusted officials had betrayed them so completely. Harrison's betrayal forced a comprehensive review of security procedures and background investigations for all staff members with access to the royal family. The incident highlighted vulnerabilities in the palace's approach to insider threats that had existed for years without detection. King Edmund, Elena's father, personally thanked Marcus for his service and announced a complete reorganization of palace security protocols. The new procedures included regular rotation of sensitive positions, enhanced background investigations, and improved communication channels for reporting concerns about unusual behavior or security threats. The diplomatic implications of Kozlov's exposure were significant. His false credentials had been sophisticated enough to pass initial verification, raising questions about the reliability of diplomatic vetting processes. The kingdom's foreign ministry worked with allied nations to develop enhanced security protocols for diplomatic visitors and cultural exchange programs. Media coverage of the incident was carefully managed to protect Princess Elena's privacy while acknowledging the heroic actions of palace security. The public learned that a security threat had been successfully neutralized but was not told the specific details of Elena's ordeal or the methods used to communicate her distress. Mrs. Pemberton received recognition for her role in preparing Elena, though she insisted that she had simply been doing her duty as an educator. The elderly tutor continued her work with the princess, but their lessons now included more formal instruction in personal safety and crisis communication. Elena's experience had demonstrated the value of practical survival skills alongside traditional academic subjects. The captured conspirators faced lengthy prison sentences for their crimes. Kozlov was charged with attempted kidnapping, espionage, and weapons violations. Harrison faced charges of treason, corruption, and conspiracy. Both men were held in maximum security facilities while their cases proceeded through the justice system. For Marcus, the incident marked a turning point in his career and his understanding of his role as a palace guard. He had always taken his responsibilities seriously, but Elena's crisis had shown him that protection sometimes required going beyond standard procedures and trusting instincts that couldn't be found in any manual. The hand signals that had saved Princess Elena became part of standard training for all palace security personnel. Marcus worked with training instructors to develop protocols for recognizing and responding to silent distress communications from any member of the royal family. The curriculum ensured that future guards would be prepared to recognize when someone was crying out for help without words. Elena's recovery progressed steadily with professional support and the knowledge that her ordeal had led to improvements in palace security that would protect other children in the future. Her experience had transformed her from victim to survivor, and her courage had helped expose and eliminate a threat that could have endangered royal families throughout the region. 3 months after the failed kidnapping attempt, Princess Elena had returned to her normal routine, but the experience had changed her in profound ways. She carried herself with a new confidence that impressed everyone who knew her. The frightened child who had used desperate hand signals to cry for help had evolved into a young woman who understood her own strength and resilience. Marcus continued his duties as captain of the guard, but his relationship with the royal family had evolved beyond traditional professional boundaries. King Edmund had appointed him as Elena's personal security advisor, a role that combined protection with mentorship. The princess often sought his guidance on matters ranging from personal safety to understanding the complexities of palace politics. "I want to learn more about security," Elena told Marcus during one of their regular meetings. "Not because I'm still scared, but because I want to understand how to protect myself and help protect others. What happened to me could happen to other children, and maybe I can help prevent that." Elena's mature response to her trauma impressed the palace psychologists who had been monitoring her recovery. Rather than becoming withdrawn or fearful, she had channeled her experience into a desire to help others who might face similar threats. The princess began studying personal safety, emergency communications, and crisis response with the same dedication she applied to her traditional academic subjects. Mrs. Pemberton had become more than just a tutor during the months following the incident. The elderly woman had proven herself to be Elena's protector and advisor, and their relationship had deepened into something resembling a grandmother-granddaughter bond. Elena often credited Mrs. Pemberton with saving her life, though the modest tutor always insisted that Elena's own courage and intelligence had been the decisive factors. The investigation into the criminal organization had continued to yield results. International law enforcement agencies had identified and arrested several other members of the group, preventing additional kidnapping attempts against wealthy families in neighboring countries. Elena's case had become a model for how to recognize and respond to similar threats. Colonel Reynolds, Marcus's former commanding officer, visited the palace to deliver a briefing on the broader implications of the conspiracy. The criminal organization had been more extensive than initially realized, with operations planned against several royal families and prominent political figures across the region. Elena's successful rescue had disrupted their entire network. "Your princess's courage and your quick response probably saved more than just one life," Colonel Reynolds told Marcus. "Intelligence indicates they were planning at least 3 other operations using similar methods. When their first major target failed so completely, it sent a message that discouraged other criminal groups from attempting similar plots." The palace had implemented numerous security improvements based on lessons learned from Elena's case. New communication protocols allowed staff members to report concerns about visitor behavior or unusual requests for information. Enhanced background investigations had identified 2 other staff members with questionable financial circumstances that could have made them vulnerable to criminal recruitment. Marcus had worked closely with security consultants to develop training programs that went beyond traditional guard duties. Palace personnel now learned to recognize behavioral indicators of distress, understand basic emergency communication methods, and respond appropriately to situations where direct intervention might escalate danger rather than resolve it. Elena's story had also influenced how the royal family approached public safety education. Working with child safety organizations, they developed programs to teach children about recognizing threats and communicating distress in situations where they couldn't speak freely. The princess herself participated in creating educational materials, though her involvement was kept private to protect her from unwanted attention. The diplomatic fallout from Kozlov's exposure had led to significant changes in how the kingdom processed foreign visitors and cultural exchange requests. New verification procedures made it much more difficult for criminals to create convincing false identities, and visiting diplomats were now subject to continuous monitoring rather than the courtesy-based surveillance that had allowed Kozlov to operate. Freely Harrison's trial had concluded with a conviction on all charges, resulting in a sentence of 25 years in prison. The former Lord Chancellor had cooperated with investigators after his conviction, providing additional information about how criminal organizations recruited government insiders. His testimony had helped develop new protocols for protecting officials from financial manipulation and blackmail. Elena's academic performance had actually improved in the months following her ordeal. Her teachers reported that she approached her studies with increased focus and maturity, particularly in subjects related to history, politics, and international relations. The princess seemed determined to understand the broader context of what had happened to her and how such threats developed. She asks very sophisticated questions about government security and international crime. Mrs. Pemberton reported to King Edmund. Elena wants to understand not just what happened to her, but why it happened and how similar situations might be prevented in the future. She's developing a remarkable grasp of complex political and security issues. The relationship between Elena and Marcus had settled into a comfortable routine of regular security briefings, combined with informal mentorship. The princess valued having someone she could talk to who understood both the practical aspects of personal protection and the emotional challenge of living under constant security. Considerations. Marcus found himself learning as much from Elena as he taught her. The princess's perspective on security threats was unique. She understood the vulnerability of being a target, while also recognizing the psychological impact of constant protection. Her insights had influenced how palace security approached the balance between safety and normal childhood development. The hand signals that had saved Elena's life had become a standard part of royal family emergency preparedness. All family members now knew basic distress communications, and palace security personnel were trained to recognize and respond to silent calls for help. The protocols had been shared with security services protecting other royal families, creating a network of improved protection across the region. Elena's relationship with her parents had also evolved following the crisis. King Edmund and Queen Margaret had initially been protective to the point of restricting their daughter's activities, but Elena's demonstrated maturity had convinced them that overprotection might be more harmful than appropriate precautions. They had gradually returned her freedoms while maintaining enhanced security measures. The princess had begun expressing interest in eventually working in international security or diplomacy when she came of age. Her experience had given her unique insights into how criminal organizations operate and how governments can protect their citizens from sophisticated threats. Elena spoke about wanting to use her position and knowledge to help other children who might face similar dangers. "I was lucky," Elena told Marcus during one of their conversations. "I had Mrs. Pemberton to teach me the signals. I had you to recognize them and respond, and I had the support to recover afterward. Not every child who faces this kind of threat has those advantages. Maybe I can help change that." The criminal organization that had targeted Elena continued to face dismantlement by international law enforcement. Several additional arrests had been made based on intelligence gathered during the palace investigation, and their operational capacity had been severely degraded. Elena's case had become a textbook example of how coordinated response could neutralize sophisticated criminal threats. Marcus had been promoted to Director of Personal Security for the royal family, a new position created specifically to address the evolving nature of threats against high-profile targets. His experience with Elena's case had demonstrated the need for security personnel who could think beyond traditional protection methods and adapt to unconventional situations. The palace had also established a private fund to support child safety, education, and emergency communication training. Elena had insisted that something positive should come from her frightening experience, and the fund provided resources to schools and community organizations working to protect children from abduction and exploitation. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, Elena was preparing to participate in a confidential conference on child protection and crisis communication. Her story would be shared with security professionals and child safety experts as an example of how proper preparation, quick thinking, and coordinated response could save lives in the most dangerous situations. 1 year after the failed kidnapping attempt, Princess Elena stood before an audience of international security experts at a confidential conference dedicated to child protection and crisis communication. At 13 years old, she had become an unexpected authority on surviving sophisticated criminal threats, and her insights were helping to shape security protocols for protecting young people around the world. The conference, held at a secure location outside the kingdom, brought together professionals from royal security services, law enforcement agencies, and child protection organizations. Elena's presentation focused on the psychological aspects of recognizing and responding to threats, offering a perspective that only someone who had lived through such an experience could provide. The most important thing I learned is that children can be much stronger and smarter than adults often expect, Elena told the audience. When Mrs. Pemberton taught me the hand signals, she didn't talk down to me or try to hide the fact that they might be needed in a dangerous situation. She trusted me to understand the seriousness and to use the knowledge responsibly. Marcus, now Director of Personal Security, watched with pride as Elena shared her story. The frightened 12-year-old who had desperately signaled for help had grown into a confident young woman who could speak authoritatively about security challenges and solutions. Her transformation demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit when properly supported and empowered. The presentation included a detailed analysis of how the hand signals had functioned as a communication method during the crisis. Elena explained how she had modified traditional military signals to fit her circumstances, creating variations that could be performed naturally during routine activities without alerting potential threats to her communications. I had to be creative about when and how to use the signals, Elena explained. If I had performed them too obviously, someone might have noticed and warned Kozlov. But I also needed to make sure Marcus would see them and understand what I was trying to communicate. It was like solving a puzzle where making a mistake could be very dangerous. The audience was particularly interested in Elena's insights about the psychological preparation that had helped her survive the ordeal. Mrs. Pemberton's approach to teaching the signals as historical communication methods had given Elena a framework for understanding their importance without creating excessive fear about potential threats. Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, had worked with Elena throughout her healing process and was also presenting at the conference. She highlighted how Elena's sense of agency and control during the crisis had contributed to her positive recovery outcomes. Princess Elena's case demonstrates the importance of preparing children with practical skills while also building their confidence in their own capabilities, Dr. Chen explained. She never felt completely helpless during her ordeal because she had tools for communication and a belief that help would come if she could make her situation known. The conference participants were eager to understand how Elena's training methods could be adapted for other children who might face security threats. The princess had worked with child safety experts to develop age-appropriate curricula that taught emergency communication without creating anxiety or fear about potential dangers. Elena's presentation also addressed the importance of having trusted adults who were prepared to recognize and respond to distress signals. She emphasized that the signals themselves were only effective because Marcus had the training and awareness needed to understand their significance and take appropriate action. The system only worked because there were people who cared enough to notice when something was wrong and brave enough to investigate even when they weren't sure what was happening, Elena said. Mrs. Pemberton cared enough to teach me. Marcus cared enough to watch and respond. Sarah cared enough to help with information. Everyone had to do their part. The international impact of Elena's case continued to expand as security services implemented lessons learned from the palace incident. Several other criminal organizations had been identified and disrupted using intelligence-gathering methods developed during the investigation of Kozlov's network. Elena's successful rescue had become a catalyst for broader improvements in child protection. Colonel Reynolds presented an analysis of how the case had influenced military and security training programs. The emphasis on recognizing nonverbal distress communications had been incorporated into curricula for personnel assigned to diplomatic protection, VIP security, and peacekeeping operations where civilian safety was a primary concern. Princess Elena's experience has taught us that crisis communication skills should be as fundamental as any other aspect of security training, Colonel Reynolds told the conference. We've discovered that many potential victims have the intelligence and courage to help themselves if they're given the tools, and if responders are prepared to recognize their efforts. Mrs. Pemberton, now recognized as an expert in child safety education, shared her philosophy about empowering young people with practical knowledge. The elderly tutor emphasized that children should be treated as capable partners in their own protection rather than passive recipients of adult oversight. Elena succeeded because she was prepared, alert, and determined to survive, Mrs. Pemberton explained. Those qualities exist in most children if we nurture them properly. Our job as adults is to provide knowledge and support while encouraging the natural resilience and intelligence that children possess. The palace had established an Elena Safety Institute, a research and training center dedicated to developing innovative approaches to child protection and crisis communication. The institute worked with schools, community organizations, and security services to implement programs based on lessons learned from Elena's experience. Elena herself had become actively involved in the institute's work, contributing to curriculum development and participating in training exercises. Her unique perspective as both a survivor and a young person helped ensure that safety programs remained practical and age-appropriate. The Institute's research had identified several other cases where children had attempted to communicate distress through nonverbal means but had not been understood by the adults around them. These cases highlighted the critical importance of training caregivers, teachers, and security personnel to recognize subtle signs of fear or calls for help. Marcus had been invited to present at law enforcement conferences around the world, sharing tactical lessons from Elena's rescue operation. His emphasis on trusting instincts and investigating unusual behavior had influenced training programs for personnel responsible for protecting high-value targets. The most sophisticated security systems in the world are useless if the people operating them don't pay attention to details and trust their professional judgment, Marcus told audiences. Princess Elena was telling us exactly what we needed to know, but only because I was prepared to listen and act on what I observed. The diplomatic implications of the case had led to international agreements on enhanced security cooperation and information sharing about criminal organizations targeting government officials and their families. Elena's case had demonstrated how quickly local threats could have global implications. The princess had also become an advocate for supporting other child victims of attempted kidnapping and exploitation. Working through charitable organizations, she helped fund counseling services and recovery programs for young people who had faced similar traumas but had not had access to the resources available to her. I was fortunate in many ways, Elena acknowledged during her conference presentation. I had people who cared about me, resources to help me recover, and the opportunity to turn my experience into something positive. Not every child has those advantages, and I think those of us who do have a responsibility to help others. As the conference concluded, Elena received recognition from international child safety organizations for her contributions to improving protection protocols and her advocacy for other young victims. The frightened child who had once desperately signaled for help had become a leader in the global effort to keep children safe from sophisticated criminal threats. The transformation was remarkable, but perhaps not surprising to those who had witnessed Elena's courage during her ordeal. The same strength and intelligence that had helped her survive had now enabled her to become a force for positive change that would protect countless other children in the future. 5 years had passed since the night Princess Elena used hand signals to save her own life, and the impact of her courage continued to ripple outward in ways no one could have predicted. Now 18 years old, Elena had graduated from the palace tutoring program and was preparing to attend university to study international security and diplomatic relations. Her experience as a child had shaped her into a passionate advocate for protecting vulnerable people around the world. The Elena Safety Institute had grown into an internationally recognized center for child protection research and training. Programs developed at the institute were now being used in schools, community centers, and government facilities across multiple countries. The simple hand signals that had once saved one frightened child had evolved into comprehensive communication, systems that empowered thousands of young people to protect themselves. Marcus, now in his 5th year as Director of Personal Security for the royal family, often reflected on how that night had changed not just Elena's life, but his own understanding of what it meant to protect others. His methods had been adopted by security services worldwide, and he had become a sought-after consultant for organizations responsible for protecting high-profile individuals and their families. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't noticed Elena's signals, or if I had dismissed them as meaningless gestures, Marcus shared during a recent interview with a professional security journal. One moment of inattention could have changed everything. It taught me that protection isn't just about physical security measures. It's about being present, aware, and ready to recognize when someone needs help. Mrs. Pemberton, now 78 years old, had retired from her formal tutoring duties, but remained actively involved with the Elena Safety Institute as an advisor and curriculum developer. The elderly woman who had quietly taught hand signals to a frightened child had become a pioneer in age-appropriate safety education, helping to develop programs that empowered children without creating unnecessary fear. Elena's university acceptance had been based on her academic achievements rather than her royal status, though her unique background and advocacy work had certainly impressed admissions committees. She planned to study at Cambridge University, where she would be able to pursue advanced coursework in international relations while maintaining her work with child protection organizations. The criminal organization that had once threatened Elena had been completely dismantled. Viktor Kozlov remained in prison serving a 30-year sentence, while Harrison had died in custody 2 years earlier. The investigation that began with Elena's rescue had ultimately led to the arrest and conviction of more than 40 individuals involved in kidnapping, extortion, and human trafficking operations across Europe. Intelligence reports indicated that Elena's successful rescue had indeed served as a deterrent to other criminal groups considering similar operations. The high-profile failure and subsequent international cooperation in dismantling the organization had sent a clear message that targeting royal children would result in severe consequences and coordinated law enforcement response. Elena's relationship with her parents had evolved as she matured into adulthood. King Edmund and Queen Margaret had initially struggled with balancing their protective instincts with their daughter's growing independence, but Elena's demonstrated wisdom and capability had convinced them to trust her judgment about security matters and personal choices. "Elena knows more about personal security than most adults ever will," Queen Margaret said during a rare interview about her daughter's experiences. "We worried that what happened to her might make her fearful or withdrawn, but instead, it made her stronger and more determined to help others. We're incredibly proud of the woman she's become." The princess had begun writing a book about her experiences, working with child psychologists and security experts to create a resource that could help other young people understand how to recognize threats and seek help effectively. The book would be published under a pseudonym to protect her privacy, while sharing the valuable lessons learned from her ordeal. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had guided Elena through her recovery process, continued to use the princess's case as a model for helping other child trauma survivors. Elena's positive outcomes had influenced treatment approaches that emphasized empowerment and agency rather than focusing solely on victimization. Princess Elena's recovery was successful because she was able to maintain a sense of control and purpose throughout her ordeal, and afterward, Dr. Chen explained during a presentation at a trauma recovery conference. She never saw herself as just a victim. She understood that she was an active participant in her own rescue and recovery. The hand signal system that had saved Elena's life had been refined and expanded through research at the Elena Safety Institute. New variations had been developed for different age groups and situations, creating a comprehensive communication framework that could be adapted for various emergency scenarios. Elena had also become involved in training programs for diplomatic security personnel, sharing her insights about recognizing and responding to threats against protected individuals. Her perspective as someone who had been both a target and a survivor brought unique value to security training curricula. The International Conference on Child Protection had become an annual event, with Elena serving as a keynote speaker each year. Her presentations continued to evolve as she gained new insights and as global security challenges changed, but her core message remained consistent. Children are capable of protecting themselves when given appropriate tools and support. "I want every child to know that they have the right to feel safe and the ability to seek help when they don't," Elena said during her most recent conference presentation. "The signals I learned were just tools. The real power came from understanding that I deserved protection and that there were people who would help me if I could find a way to communicate my need." Marcus had been promoted to Director of International Security Cooperation, a new position created to coordinate anti-kidnapping efforts between royal security services worldwide. His experience with Elena's case had made him a valuable resource for developing rapid response protocols and intelligence sharing agreements. The palace had also established a scholarship program for children who had survived kidnapping attempts or other serious crimes. Elena had insisted that her ordeal should lead to opportunities for other young people to recover and pursue their dreams despite traumatic experiences. Looking toward the future, Elena planned to use her university education to prepare for a career in international diplomacy, with a focus on child protection and human trafficking prevention. Her experience had given her insights into how criminal organizations operate and how governments could work together more effectively to protect vulnerable populations. The transformation from frightened child to confident advocate was complete, but Elena never forgot the moment when she first used hand signals to cry for help in a palace corridor. That desperate communication had not only saved her life, it had launched a global movement to empower children and improve protection for those who needed it most. As she prepared to leave the palace for university, Elena carried with her the knowledge that her courage had already changed the world in small but important ways. Thousands of children had learned communication skills that might someday save their lives. Security personnel around the world had been trained to recognize distress signals that might otherwise go unnoticed. Most importantly, the message had been sent to potential predators that children were not helpless victims. They were intelligent, resourceful individuals with the ability to protect themselves and seek help when needed. The hand signals that had once represented Elena's desperate fear had become symbols of hope and empowerment for children everywhere. Her story would continue to inspire and protect others long after she had moved on to new challenges and opportunities, ensuring that her childhood ordeal had created a lasting legacy of safety and security for generations of young people who would never know her name, but would benefit from her courage.